The dust rose thick in the afternoon air as Adais was dragged across the village square of Umora, her feet scraping against the red earth that had once been her playground. Her wrapper, the same blue ankara her mother had sewn with trembling hands in her final days, now hung torn and faded against her trembling body. The sun beat down mercilessly on this gathering, but it was the eyes of the villagers that burned hotter, those familiar faces now twisted with pity, judgment, and something far worse, relief that their own daughters were safe at home. And Kemji stood beneath the ancient baobab tree where generations had settled disputes and celebrated victories, her fingers moving rapidly as she counted crisp naira notes with the kind of focus she'd never shown her stepdaughter. The merchant before her, a fat man whose gold teeth flashed when he smiled, adjusted his agbada and declared his final offer. 200,000 naira for a girl of 17, untouched and obedient, ready for whatever fate he had planned in the city. Adaizi's eyes desperately scanned the crowd for any sign of mercy, searching for Mama Ikane, who used to slip her mangoes at the market, or Chief Okonkwo, who had once called her a daughter of destiny. But every single person looked away as if her suffering was contagious. In this village, where everyone knew the intimate details of their neighbors' lives, debt was more than money owed. It was a curse that spread like wildfire, consuming everything in its path, swallowing even the innocent. Nkemji's voice cut through the murmurs like a machete through grass when she spoke, her words sharp and final as she told the merchant to take the girl away. "She's brought nothing but misfortune to this family anyway," she declared, as if Adaizi's mere existence had summoned every hardship they'd faced since her father died. But then, something happened that shifted the very air in that square, something that made even the oldest grandmother stop her disapproving head-shaking and turn toward the road. The sound came first, smooth, powerful, completely foreign to these dusty paths where only Okadas and worn-out trucks usually traveled. A black SUV with windows tinted dark as midnight rolled into the square, its engine purring with the quiet confidence of wealth, and stopped just meters from where Adais stood, trembling in her stepmother's grip. Every eye turned toward this gleaming machine that seemed to have emerged from another world entirely, and in the silence that followed, you could hear nothing but the hammering of hearts and the whisper of fate changing direction. The door of the SUV opened with a soft click that seemed impossibly loud in the stunned silence, and a man stepped out onto the red earth wearing a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than every wrapper and agbada in the entire village combined. His presence commanded attention, not through aggression, but through the quiet certainty of someone who had never been told no, who had built empires with his bare hands and refused to watch injustice unfold before his eyes. Olamide Adeleke stood tall, his dark skin gleaming in the afternoon sun, his eyes sharp and intelligent as they swept across the scene before him, the trembling girl, the greedy stepmother, the merchant with his hand outstretched, the villagers frozen in their judgment. His gaze finally settled on Adais, and in that moment, something passed between them that neither could name, a recognition without knowing, a connection without understanding, as if their souls had been waiting for this very intersection of circumstance and destiny. The merchant turned, irritation flashing across his face at this interruption to his business transaction, ready to dismiss this stranger who dared interfere with a deal already made. But when Olamide spoke, his voice was quiet yet absolute, carrying the weight of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed, and he said just one word that would change everything. "Stop," he commanded, and the single syllable hung in the air like thunder before rain, like the moment before lightning strikes and transforms the landscape forever. The merchant sputtered, his gold teeth no longer flashing in amusement, but bared in annoyance as he gestured toward Adaze and declared that this matter didn't concern wealthy men from the city who understood nothing about village affairs and debt settlement. Olamide walked forward with measured steps, each footfall deliberate and purposeful, closing the distance between himself and the tableau of transaction that disgusted him to his core. "The girl," he said, his eyes never leaving Adaze's tear-stained face. "How much are they selling her for? Because I'm making this my concern whether you like it or not." Nkemji's eyes widened as she recognized the scent of even greater profit, her mind already calculating how much more she could extract from this well-dressed stranger, who seemed to have money to burn and a conscience that might be exploited. 400,000 naira, she announced quickly, doubling her price without shame or hesitation, her voice trembling, not with grief, but with the anticipation of wealth beyond her gambling debts. Olamide pulled out his phone, his fingers moving across the screen with practiced ease, and within seconds he looked up and said one word that made the entire village gasp. "Done," Olamide declared, the transfer complete before Nkemji could even confirm her account details. 400,000 naira moved with the casual ease of someone for whom such amounts were insignificant compared to the value of human dignity. "The girl comes with me," he stated without room for negotiation, his tone making it clear that this was not a request, but a decision already made and executed. The entire square fell into a silence so complete that you could hear the rustling of leaves in the baobab tree, hear the beating of Adaizi's heart as she tried to comprehend what was happening, hear Nkemji's sharp intake of breath as she checked her phone and saw more money than she'd ever possessed suddenly sitting in her account. Who was this man who transferred 400,000 naira as easily as buying a kara from a street vendor, who wore confidence like a second skin, who looked at a village girl being sold and saw something worth saving? The villagers whispered among themselves, theories and speculations flying faster than gossip at the stream where women washed clothes and traded secrets. But Adaze stood frozen, caught between the nightmare she knew and the mystery approaching her with an outstretched hand, uncertain whether she was being rescued or simply sold to a wealthier buyer with more sophisticated intentions. Olamide's driver, a quiet man named Ibuka, who had seen his employer do many unexpected things but never this, opened the back door of the SUV and waited with patient understanding. "Come," Olamide said to Adaze, his voice gentler now, free from the steel it had carried when addressing the merchant and her stepmother. "You're safe now." And those 3 words seemed impossible to believe for a girl who hadn't felt safe since the day her mother stopped breathing, and the world became a cold and hostile place. Adaze's legs moved as if controlled by someone else, carrying her toward this gleaming vehicle, while her mind screamed warnings about strangers and dangers and the possibility that this was simply another form of the same exploitation. She climbed into the SUV, her worn slippers looking absurd against the pristine leather seats, her torn wrapper a stark contrast to the luxury surrounding her. And as the door closed, she caught one last glimpse of Nkemji, clutching her phone with trembling hands, already planning how to spend her blood money. The engine started with a quiet hum, and the vehicle began to move, carrying Adaze away from the only world she'd ever known, away from the village that had watched her suffer and done nothing, away from the red earth where her parents were buried and her childhood had died. The silence inside the SUV was thick with unspoken questions as they drove away from Umuora, the village growing smaller in the rearview mirror, until it was nothing but a memory and a wound. Adaze pressed herself against the door, as far from Olamide as the confined space allowed, her body tense with fear and confusion and the exhausting vigilance of someone who had learned that kindness was often just cruelty, wearing a patient mask. "Who are you?" she finally whispered, her voice barely audible over the smooth hum of the engine, and the question contained multitudes. "Who are you? What do you want? Why did you do this? Am I safe, or have I just walked into a more sophisticated trap?" Olamide turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw something unexpected, not the hunger of the merchant or the coldness of her stepmother, but something deeper and more complicated. Sadness, perhaps, or recognition, or the ghost of old pain that had never fully healed. "I'm someone who couldn't stand by and watch," he said simply, as if spending 400,000 naira on a stranger was the most natural thing in the world, as if interrupting a human transaction was something anyone would do if they had the means. His answer raised more questions than it answered, but Adazy found herself wanting to believe him, wanting to trust in the possibility that not everyone in the world was cruel. The landscape changed as they drove, villages becoming towns, towns becoming cities, dirt roads giving way to smooth highways that stretched toward a future Adazy had never imagined. She had never traveled beyond the neighboring villages where her mother used to sell vegetables, had never seen buildings taller than 2 stories, had never witnessed the kind of wealth and development that existed just hours from her small world of suffering. Olamide worked on his laptop, occasionally glancing at Adazy with concern, and when she asked where they were going, he told her about Port Harcourt first, then Lagos, about safety and new beginnings and possibilities that seemed like fairy tales to a girl who had been sold like a goat that morning. The city of Port Harcourt rose before them like something from a dream or a Nollywood movie, buildings that touched the sky, cars everywhere gleaming in the fading sunlight, billboards advertising products and lifestyles that belonged to a different universe entirely. The SUV pulled up to a hotel so grand that Adazy thought it might be the governor's mansion, all glass and marble and doormen in uniforms more expensive than anything in her village. "Come," Olamide said again, and this time she followed with less hesitation, walking through doors that opened automatically, across floors so polished she could see her reflection, past people who moved with the casual confidence of those who belonged in such places. The hotel suite Olamide led her to was bigger than the entire compound where she'd grown up, with furniture so pristine she was afraid to touch anything with her dusty hands and torn clothes. "You'll stay here tonight," he explained, his tone businesslike but not unkind. "And tomorrow we'll continue to Lagos where you'll be safer. Ibuka's wife Amara is bringing you clothes, toiletries, everything you need," he continued, and the practicality of his planning suggested he'd done this before, or at least thought deeply about what a traumatized girl might require. "Lock the door. Trust no one but Amara," he instructed, and then he paused at the threshold and turned back to face her. "But I don't understand." Adazy's voice cracked as the weight of the day finally crashed down upon her. "Why are you helping me? What do you want from me? Because nobody does something like this without expecting something in return." Olamide was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tightening as if he was deciding how much truth to share, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a pain that matched her own. "Because 12 years ago, someone sold my sister the same way, and I was too young, too powerless to stop it," he said, the words emerging like shards of glass from his throat. The revelation hung between them like a bridge across their separate griefs, connecting 2 strangers through the universal language of loss and powerlessness and rage against injustice. "I searched for years," Olamide continued, his eyes distant as if seeing the past play out before him. spent millions hiring investigators and following leads that went nowhere, bribing officials and chasing ghosts across 3 countries. But I never found her, and the defeat in his voice was absolute, the kind of failure that reshapes a soul and redirects a life's purpose. When I saw you in that square today, he said, meeting Adaisy's eyes directly, I saw Ngozi. I saw my sister at 16 being dragged away while I stood frozen and useless. And this time I could do something, he finished. This time I had the power and the money and the choice to intervene, and I couldn't live with myself if I walked away. You're not property, he told her with quiet intensity. You're not cursed. You're not worthless. You're a human being who deserves dignity and choice and a future that's yours to determine. Remember that, he said, and then he left, the door closing softly behind him, leaving Adaiz alone in this palace of a room to process the impossible reality of her rescue. She stood in the center of the suite for a long time, unable to reconcile the morning's horror with the evening's luxury, unable to believe that this wasn't some elaborate dream before a darker awakening. Then she caught sight of herself in the full-length mirror, torn wrapper, dusty skin, hair wild and uncombed, eyes red from crying, and she looked like a village ghost haunting a palace, like 2 worlds colliding in one exhausted body. Amara arrived an hour later, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and gentle hands, and the warm authority of someone who had raised children and knew how to comfort the traumatized. She brought clothes, simple but new and clean, and showed Adaize how to use the shower with its miraculous hot water and soap that smelled like coconuts and shampoo that actually made hair soft instead of brittle. Child, Amara said as she helped Adaize untangle her hair, my husband told me a little of what happened, and I want you to know that you're safe now. Mr. Olamide is a good man, the kind who helps because it's right, not because he wants something in return. That night, Adaiz lay in a bed, softer than clouds, cleaner than anything she'd ever touched, and wondered if this was real, or if she'd wake up back in the storage hut with Nkemji's rope cutting into her wrists. But morning came, with golden sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, and it was still real, the sweet, the safety, the impossible rescue. Olamide knocked at dawn, dressed in a fresh suit, looking like he'd already conquered half the day's challenges before most people opened their eyes. We're going to Lagos, he announced. My main office and home are there. You'll be safer in my compound until we figure out the next steps. Next steps, Adaiz repeated, the phrase foreign to someone who'd spent years simply surviving each day without thought of any future beyond endurance. Education, Olamide said as they walked to the elevator. Training, skills, choices. Whatever you want to build for yourself, we'll make it happen. The drive to Lagos took most of the day, even on good roads, and Adaiz watched Nigeria unfold through tinted windows like a documentary about her own country that she'd never truly seen. Olamide worked and made phone calls, but occasionally he'd pause to explain things when she asked questions, patient with her ignorance, never making her feel small for not knowing about highways or corporations or the wider world beyond Umuora. She learned that he owned a construction company called Adeleke Enterprises that built bridges and roads and high-rises across Nigeria, that he was 32 and self-made, one of the youngest billionaires in West Africa. How did you become so successful? Adaiz asked, because the distance between her village poverty and his city wealth seemed impossible to cross, and she needed to understand the bridge. By remembering where I came from, Olamide answered, his eyes still on his laptop, but his voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. My father was a laborer who died in a construction accident when I was 15, crushed under fallen scaffolding, while the site managers looked the other way, he explained, and there was no compensation, no justice, no acknowledgement that a human life had been lost in their pursuit of profit. I swore I'd build a company that valued every worker's life, where safety wasn't optional but fundamental, where people mattered more than margins, he continued, and you could hear the teenage boy's rage still fueling the man's purpose. And your mother? Adaz asked softly, sensing there was more pain in this story. She died of grief 6 months after we lost Ngozi, Olamide said, his jaw tight. She just gave up, stopped eating, stopped speaking, stopped living, and one morning she simply didn't wake up. I was alone at 16, he told her, worked 3 jobs while finishing school, put myself through university, started with one small contract, and built from there, each success motivated by the memory of everything I'd lost. You did all that alone, Adaz whispered, awed by the sheer will it must have taken, and she began to see him not as some distant billionaire, but as someone who understood suffering intimately. Is anyone ever truly alone? Olamide asked philosophically. People helped me along the way. A teacher who saw potential. A boss who gave me a chance. A banker who approved a loan everyone said was too risky. Maybe that's why I can't ignore someone who needs help, he mused, because I remember what it feels like to be drowning and have someone throw you a rope. Lagos announced itself with noise and light and chaos that assaulted every sense, a living organism of hustle and ambition and dreams both realized and crushed. The city sprawled endlessly, street hawkers weaving through traffic with the agility of dancers, yellow Danfo buses belching smoke, and above it all, gleaming towers proclaiming the wealth of those who'd conquered this concrete jungle. Olamide's compound sat in Ikoyi behind high walls and security gates, the house inside all glass and clean lines, modern architecture softened by touches of tradition, Benin bronzes on the walls, Aso-oke fabric draped artfully, the scent of incense from a shrine to his ancestors. This is Obioma, he introduced an older woman who radiated authority and warmth in equal measure. She manages my household. And Obioma, this is Adaizi. She'll be staying with us. Treat her as family. Obioma's eyes assessed Adaizi with the penetrating gaze of someone who could read stories written in posture and silence, but there was no judgment, only understanding. Welcome, child, she said, her voice carrying the comfort of mothers everywhere. Come, let me show you your room. The room was beautiful, with soft colors and comfortable furniture, and windows overlooking a garden where palm trees swayed in the evening breeze. But what caught Adaz's attention was the bookshelf packed with novels and textbooks, stories and knowledge waiting to be discovered. Mr. Olamide believes every room should have books, Obioma explained. He says a mind without stories is a house without windows. Over the following weeks, Adaz's life transformed in ways that seemed miraculous after years of darkness and deprivation. Olamide hired a tutor named Miss Folick, a patient woman who didn't mock Adaizi's educational gaps, but filled them with gentle persistence, teaching mathematics and English and science and history until the world opened up through knowledge. He brought a seamstress who made clothes that fit properly, that made Adaiz feel human and dignified again, not expensive designer pieces, but simple outfits that restored her sense of self-worth. He never touched her inappropriately, never made demands, never even raised his voice or suggested that his generosity came with hidden prices to be paid later. But something was growing between them, subtle as dawn but just as inevitable. A connection that neither had planned, but both were beginning to feel. It started small, with Olamide asking about her lessons, genuinely interested in her progress, celebrating when she mastered a difficult concept. It grew through Adaizi waiting to hear his car in the evening, her day feeling incomplete until he returned from the office. It deepened during their conversations in the garden after dinner, talking about everything and nothing. Her dreams, his regrets, her mother's wisdom, his sister's laugh, the shape of grief, and the possibility of joy. "Tell me about your mother," he said one evening, as fireflies danced in the growing darkness, and Adaiz found herself sharing memories she'd locked away for self-protection. Chinwe had been beautiful, she told him. Not magazine beauty, but the beauty of sunrise over hills, of rivers running deep and clear. She sang while pounding yam, her voice carrying across the compound like a blessing, and she told me stories about the tortoise's cracked shell and the leopard's spots. On her deathbed she gave me this, Adaiz said, pulling out the Sankofa necklace she'd hidden under her shirt, the symbol of learning from the past. Learn from the past. Olamide read the Adinkra symbol, running his finger gently over the pendant without touching her skin. Wise words from a wise woman. She told me I was destined for light, Adaizi whispered, her voice breaking slightly. But I spent so many years in darkness that I forgot what light even looked like. Sometimes we need darkness to recognize light when it comes, Olamide said softly. And when their eyes met, something passed between them that went beyond gratitude or pity, or even friendship, something deeper and more dangerous and infinitely more precious. But destiny wasn't finished testing them, wasn't done throwing obstacles in the path of whatever was building between the rescued girl and her rescuer. 3 months after Adaizi arrived in Lagos, 3 months of peace and growth and tentative happiness, Nkemji appeared like a bad dream, refusing to end. Olamide's secretary called, her voice flustered and apologetic. "Sir, there's a woman here claiming to be Adaizi's mother, demanding to see you. Security is holding her, but she's causing a scene in the lobby, threatening to call the police and the newspapers." "I'm coming down," Olamide said, his voice turning to granite, the warmth draining away and leaving only cold fury at this intrusion. In the marble lobby of Adalek Enterprises, Nkemji stood with Chidinma, both dressed in their market-day finest, looking wildly out of place among the glass and steel and expensive art, desperation and greed written plainly on their faces. "There you are!" Nkemji's voice rang out shrill and accusing. "You kidnapped my daughter, stole her away. I'm calling the police. I'm going to the newspapers. I'll tell everyone what you've done." "Enough." Olamide's single word cut through her hysteria like a blade, the command in his voice making even the security guard stand straighter. "Adaiz is not your daughter," he continued with icy precision. "You sold her, remember? Sold her to a merchant for 200,000 naira to pay your gambling debts." "I was desperate," Nkemji protested, shifting tactics to pleading. "I made a terrible mistake, but she belongs with family, with people who've known her all her life." "You wanted money," Olamide said flatly, pulling out his phone. "So here's what I'll do. I'll transfer 1 million naira to you right now, more than enough to settle whatever debts you've accumulated since selling your stepdaughter. Consider it payment for the years of suffering you caused an innocent child," he continued, his contempt clear in every syllable. "But you will never contact Adaiz again, never speak her name, never acknowledge her existence. If you do," Olamide finished, his voice dropping to a lethal quiet, "I have lawyers who will ensure you face charges for human trafficking, and I promise you, they're very good at what they do." Nkemji's eyes widened as her phone buzzed with the transfer notification, 1 million naira appearing in her account, more money than she'd dreamed of even in her greediest fantasies. "Take it and disappear," Olamide commanded, "or refuse and face the consequences. Your choice, but choose now. Greed won as it always did with Nkemji, as it had won when she sold Adaize, as it would continue to win until karma came to collect its debts. She grabbed Chidinma's arm and left without another word, her daughter trailing behind with shame written across her face. But Adaize, watching from the stairwell where Obioma had hidden her, felt something break inside. Not sadness because she'd mourned that relationship years ago, but finality, the last thread connecting her to her past, cut cleanly and completely. That night, she couldn't sleep, couldn't quiet the thoughts spinning through her mind, and she found Olamide in his study, working late as always. "I don't know how to thank you," she said from the doorway, her voice small in the large room. "You don't need to thank me," he replied automatically, but there was tension in his shoulders, a weight in his silence that suggested something unsaid. "But I want to," Adaize insisted, stepping into the room. "You've given me everything, education, safety, dignity, a future, and you've asked for nothing in return." "That's not entirely true," Olamide said quietly, standing and moving toward her with the careful control of someone fighting an internal battle. "What do you want?" Adaize asked, her heart beginning to race, and the question hung between them loaded with possibility and danger and hope. "I want," he began, then stopped, struggling with words for the first time since she'd met him. "Something I have no right to ask, something that's probably impossible and definitely inappropriate." "Tell me," she urged, because she needed to know, needed to understand this thing building between them. "Adaize," he said her name like a prayer and a curse. "You came into my life as someone I was saving, someone I was helping, but somewhere along the way, you became the one who saved me. You reminded me why I built all this." He gestured at the expensive office and the empire beyond it, not for wealth or power, but to protect people who can't protect themselves, to create the justice that didn't exist for my father or my sister. "You gave my life meaning again," he continued, his voice raw with honesty that must have cost him. "Made me remember that success without purpose is just expensive emptiness." "I'm falling in love with you," Olamide finally said, the words emerging like a confession and an apology combined. The admission hung in the air between them, dangerous and precious, and Adaize's heart hammered so loudly, she was certain he could hear it. "I know it's wrong," Olamide rushed on. "You're 17 and I'm 32. You've been through trauma, and the last thing you need is pressure or expectations from the man who's supposed to be protecting you. But I can't lie to you, and I can't lie to myself anymore," he said, his hands clenched at his sides as if physically restraining himself from reaching for her. "You think I don't know what love is because I'm young?" Adaize asked, her voice stronger than she felt. "You think I'm too broken or too naive to recognize what's real? I think you deserve the freedom to discover it without influence," Olamide answered. "The freedom to choose your path without feeling obligated to the person who helped you." "Then let me tell you what I've discovered," Adaize said, stepping closer. "I've learned that love isn't pretty words or grand gestures or the romance in Nollywood films. It's someone who sees you at your absolute worst and still treats you with kindness," she continued. "It's someone who gives without demanding, who protects without controlling, who believes in you when you've forgotten how to believe in yourself. You're not taking advantage of me," she told him firmly. "You've given me the one thing I never had, the power to choose, the freedom to decide my own future. And I choose this," Adaize said, taking his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his. "I choose you, not because I'm grateful or obligated or confused, but because I know my own heart." Adaize, Olamide whispered, his resolve crumbling. I'm not a child anymore, she interrupted. Life made me grow up fast, made me learn to read people and situations and truth from lies. And I know what I feel, she insisted. I know that you make me feel safe enough to dream again, strong enough to face my past, hopeful enough to believe in my future. Olamide pulled her close then, carefully as if she might break, and for the first time since her mother died, Daisy felt truly home, truly seen, truly valued. They stood there in the quiet study while Lagos hummed beyond the windows, two damaged souls who'd found unexpected healing in each other. But the village of Umuwara had not forgotten its lost daughter, and news traveled fast in places where everyone knew everyone's business and gossip was currency. Word reached the village that the cursed girl had been taken by a billionaire, that she lived in Lagos now wearing fine clothes and riding in expensive cars. And slowly, reluctantly, the village elders began to talk, began to question, began to wonder if perhaps they'd been terribly wrong about many things. Perhaps we misjudged her, Chief Okonkwo admitted in a meeting under the same baobab tree where Adai's had been sold. Perhaps the girl was never cursed at all but blessed, and we were too blind to see it. The shame grew, whispered from compound to compound, passed along at the stream and the market, the collective guilt of a community that had stood by while one of their own was sold like property. And in Kemji, who'd spent her ₦1,000,000 on more gambling, more schemes, more failed attempts to multiply money through greed instead of work, felt the village's cold shoulder. People who once greeted her now turned away. Mothers pulled their children from her path as if her bad decisions were contagious. Your mother sold our sister for nothing, Chidinma shouted at her one evening, her resentment finally boiling over. And now we're poorer than before, more ashamed than before, more alone than before. Desperate and isolated, Nkemji tried one final scheme to reclaim relevance and perhaps extract more money from the situation she'd created. She went to the newspapers with a story carefully crafted to paint herself as a victim and Olamide as a predator. Billionaire seduces underage girl he rescued from poverty. The headlines screamed, and the scandal exploded across social media and news channels. Olamide's lawyers fought back with cease and desist letters and threats of defamation suits, but the damage spread like oil on water, staining his reputation and his business. Business partners called with concerns, investors questioned his judgment, social media erupted with outrage from people who knew nothing but felt entitled to condemn everything. And then Adaeze did something that surprised everyone, something that demonstrated just how much she'd grown from the frightened girl sold in a village square. Against Olamide's wishes, against his lawyer's strong advice, against every voice telling her to stay silent and let the professionals handle it, she called a press conference. She stood before cameras and reporters and the court of public opinion, dressed simply but with dignity, her mother's Sankofa necklace visible at her throat. Olamide Adeleke is not a predator, she said, her voice steady and clear despite her racing heart. He's a man who saw injustice and chose to act when everyone else chose to look away. He gave me education when I'd been denied schooling, she continued, safety when I'd been sold, respect when I'd been treated as property. He never demanded anything, never touched me inappropriately, never suggested that his help came with conditions or prices, Adaeze stated, meeting the camera directly. And when I was old enough, wise enough, healed enough to know my own heart, she said, I chose him. I chose this. I chose love based on respect and shared values and genuine connection. She held up the Sankofa necklace for the cameras to see. This symbol means learn from the past, and my past taught me that love is action, not words. that character is proven through choices, not promises. Olamide proved his love through every decision he made, she declared, through patience and protection and believing in my potential when I'd forgotten I had any. And I will spend my life proving mine, Adais finished, not because I owe him, but because I choose him. Every single day I choose him. One reporter, emboldened by her honesty, asked the question on everyone's mind. What do you say to those who claim you're too young to make this choice, too traumatized to know what's healthy? Adais smiled, sad but certain, and her answer would be quoted for weeks after. I say that age is not just years lived, but experiences survived, she began. I say that some of us are forced to grow up faster than others, forced to learn hard truths, while others remain sheltered in innocence. I say that the people questioning my choices are often the same ones who stood silent while I was being sold like livestock. She continued, her voice gaining strength, and their sudden concern for my well-being is convenient, but late and ultimately hollow. The truth, she said, is that I've lived more in 17 years than many live in 70. I've lost both parents, survived abuse, been sold by family, and rebuilt myself from ashes, Adais stated. And through all of that, I've learned to recognize genuine care from manipulation, real love from exploitation. I know my own mind, I know my own heart, and I know that what Olamide and I share is built on mutual respect and shared purpose, she declared, and no amount of judgment from strangers will change that truth. The room fell silent as her words landed with the weight of undeniable experience, and slowly the tide of public opinion began to shift. People saw not a victim being exploited, but a survivor taking control of her narrative, not a child being manipulated, but a young woman who'd earned her wisdom through fire. Social media, fickle as always, turned from condemnation to celebration, with hashtags supporting Adaisi's right to choose and Olamide's intervention trending for days. And back in Umuora, the village elders watched the press conference on a phone passed from hand to hand, and shame settled over them like heavy rain. We failed her, Chief Okonkwo said finally, his voice heavy with regret. We stood by while she was sold. We called her cursed when she was blessed. We drove away a daughter of destiny. The collective guilt grew until it demanded action, demanded some attempt at making amends for their complicity in her suffering. And so the elders made a decision that would close one chapter while opening another. They gathered under the baobab tree and agreed unanimously on what must be done. Nkemji must be banished from Umora, they declared. She brought shame to us all, sold her own daughter for greed, and then tried to destroy that same daughter's happiness with lies. Chief Okonkwo delivered the judgment personally, standing before Nkemji's compound with the other elders as witnesses to this moment of communal justice. You have brought disgrace upon this village, he declared, his voice carrying the authority of generations. You sold your stepdaughter like property to pay gambling debts, then attempted to destroy her chance at happiness with malicious lies. Leave Umuora and never return, the elders proclaimed in unison. You are no longer welcome among people who value family and truth and basic human decency. Nkemji left that very day with nothing but the clothes on her back and the crushing weight of her choices, wandering from town to town where her reputation preceded her like a curse. No one would hire her, no one would shelter her. Even Chidinma, her own blood, turned her away, saying, You destroyed everything, Mama. I have to rebuild my life without you dragging me down. She ended up in a distant city, working as a cleaner in the very market where she used to gamble, the place of her downfall, now the only place desperate enough to employ her. She lived in a room smaller than the storage hut where she'd imprisoned Adaze, ate once a day if she was lucky, and every naira she earned went to mere survival with nothing left for the greed that had once consumed her. Karma, as the old people say, has perfect aim and infinite patience, and it had found Nkemji with precision. 6 months after the press conference, 6 months after Nkemji's banishment, 6 months of Adaeze and Olamide building their life together openly and without shame, something beautiful happened. Olamide took Adaeze back to Umuora, not in secret or in fear, but in a convoy of vehicles carrying gifts for the village and hope for the future. He came to do what tradition demanded, to ask properly for what his heart had already claimed, to honor the customs that connected Adaeze to her ancestors and her heritage. The village gathered in the square, the same place where Adaeze had nearly been sold, transformed now into a space of redemption and celebration rather than shame and transaction. Olamide knelt before the village elders in the traditional way, his expensive suit replaced with a simple wrapper, his billionaire status set aside to become simply a man seeking permission to marry. "I come to ask for Adeeze's hand in marriage," he said clearly, his voice carrying across the silent square. "I know I'm not from this village. I know I took her without your blessing, but I love her and I wish to honor your traditions." Chief Okonkwo, ancient and wise, studied him for a long moment while the entire village held its collective breath waiting for judgment. Then slowly, deliberately, the old chief smiled with warmth that erased years from his weathered face. "Rise, my son," Chief Okonkwo commanded gently. "You need not kneel before us when you have already stood tall where we failed. You honored her when we dishonored her. You saw her value when we were blind to it. The ancestors have shown us our mistake," the chief continued. "We pushed away a daughter of light because we feared shadows that existed only in our own hearts. We called her cursed when the curse was our own cowardice and complicity. But you saw what we refused to see," Chief Okonkwo said, turning to address the whole village now. "This man from the city saw the truth that we, her own people, denied. Who are we to stand in the way of destiny?" the elders proclaimed together. "Who are we to refuse a union blessed by the ancestors and proven through sacrifice and genuine love?" The village erupted in celebration. Drums that had been silent began to play. Women who had once whispered cruel gossip now ululated with joy. Children who had feared Adaeze now danced around her. The wedding was planned for the next new moon, to be held under the same baobab tree where Adaeze's darkest moment had occurred, transforming that space of trauma into a testament of triumph. The village worked together to prepare, building a canopy of palm fronds and fresh flowers, cooking enough jollof rice and a goosey soup to feed 3 villages, brewing palm wine and zobo for the celebration. When the wedding day arrived, the morning sun blessed Umuora with golden light that seemed to promise new beginnings and healed wounds. Adaeze dressed in the finest aso-oke that Olamide's money could buy, deep purple and gold threads woven into patterns that told stories of resilience and redemption. But around her neck, she wore only her mother's simple Sankofa necklace. She stood in the compound where she'd suffered, where her stepmother had beaten her, and her father had failed to protect her. But today it held no power over her, because she'd transformed her pain into purpose. Olamide wore traditional attire too, honoring her culture and her past, and the journey that had brought them to this moment, his wealth evident not in designer labels, but in the quality of the fabric and the sincerity of his commitment. The ceremony began with libations poured to the ancestors, calling on Chinwe and Ikenna to witness their daughter's joy. asking for blessings from those who had gone before and those yet to come. Chief Okonkwo presided, his voice strong despite his age, speaking words that bound not just two people, but two worlds, village and city, tradition and modernity, past suffering and future hope. The village watched as Adais and Olamide exchanged vows, their promises spoken in Igbo first, then English, honoring both where she came from and where they were going together. As the sun climbed higher, the celebration grew louder with drums playing rhythms that had echoed through generations, women dancing with a joy that seemed to heal old wounds through movement and music. Children ran between adults' legs, their laughter a reminder that life continues, that new generations would grow up hearing this story of the girl who was sold but found love anyway. Adaizi and Olamide danced together, his expensive education meeting her village-taught steps. Two different worlds finding harmony in shared rhythm and mutual respect and genuine affection. The feast that followed was abundant beyond measure, tables groaning under the weight of food prepared with love and reconciliation, the entire village eating together, as they should have done years ago. And as evening approached, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple and deep blue, Adais slipped away from the celebration to the mango tree where her mother was buried. She knelt on the earth that held Chinwe's bones, placed her hand on the ground, and felt a connection that transcended death and time and all the years of suffering between then and now. "Mama," she whispered, "I understand now what you meant when you said I was destined for light. I understand that the darkness wasn't my end, but my beginning, wasn't my defeat, but my preparation. Every pain taught me something," Adais continued. "Every betrayal showed me the value of loyalty. Every moment of worthlessness revealed how to recognize genuine worth in myself and others. I was sold to pay a debt I didn't owe," Adis told her mother's grave, "but in that selling, I found a love I didn't know existed, found a purpose I couldn't have imagined, found myself in ways that comfort never would have taught me." She felt, rather than heard, her mother's response, a warmth in the evening breeze, a peace settling over her heart, a sense of approval and pride and eternal love that death couldn't diminish. "I'm happy, Mama," Adais whispered, "not just content or surviving, but genuinely happy. And I'm using everything you taught me to help others find their light too." She stood, brushed the red earth from her wedding attire, and returned to the celebration where Olamide was waiting, his eyes searching for her and finding her and lighting up with relief and love. "Come," he said, taking her hand. "The elders want to give us their final blessing before the night grows too late." They stood together before Chief Okonkwo and the assembled elders, before the village that had failed them and was now celebrating them, before witnesses to this improbable love story. "May your union be blessed with children who carry your strength," the chief intoned. "May your love weather all storms as it has already weathered so many. May you always remember that the greatest wealth is not money but character, not power but compassion, not status but service to others." The blessing concluded with prayers to the ancestors and libations poured to seal the words spoken. And then the village erupted in final celebration as the new couple was officially recognized. As the night deepened and stars appeared one by one like promises written in the sky, Adais and Olamide stood together watching their wedding celebration continue around them. "Are you happy?" he asked. The question simple, but weighted with everything they'd been through to reach this moment. "I'm more than happy," she answered, pulling him close. "I'm free, free from the past that tried to define me, free from the pain that tried to break me, free from the fear that tried to limit me." You gave me that freedom, Adesi said, not by taking me away from my problems, but by showing me I had the strength to overcome them myself. No, Olamide replied, shaking his head with a smile. You always had that strength. I just reminded you where to find it. Just believed in you until you could believe in yourself again. They stood in comfortable silence, two souls who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen love when hate would have been easier, who had built something beautiful from the ruins of their separate tragedies. The village that once sold her now celebrated her. The stepmother who cursed her now lived with consequences. The billionaire who saved her had found his own salvation in the process. And somewhere in a distant city, Nkemji swept floors and lived with the weight of her choices, her suffering not celebrated, but simply acknowledged as the natural result of greed and cruelty meeting their inevitable end. Karma had come full circle. Justice had found its mark. And the universe had demonstrated once again that what you put into the world eventually returns to you multiplied. But this story isn't really about Nkemji's downfall or even Olamide's wealth. It's about Adesi's transformation from victim to victor, from the sold to the celebrated, from the cursed to the blessed. It's about a girl who refused to let her circumstances define her worth, who held on to her mother's wisdom through the darkest nights, who recognized love when it appeared in unexpected form and had the courage to choose it. 3 years after the wedding, the Adeleki Foundation had grown beyond anyone's expectations, rescuing not just 47 girls, but over 200, building not 3 schools, but 12, funding not 23 businesses, but nearly 100. Adesi ran the foundation with the passion of someone who'd lived the mission, who knew intimately what these girls needed because she'd needed it herself. She traveled across Nigeria finding girls in situations like hers, girls being sold or married off or treated as property, and she intervened with Olamide's money and her own hard-won wisdom. Every girl she saved was a version of herself being rescued. Every education funded was a dream being restored. Every life transformed was a testimony to the power of intervention and care. And she did this while raising her own children, twins born on a rainy night when thunder rolled across Lagos like ancestral drums celebrating new life. They named the girl Chinwe after her grandmother, the boy Ikenna after her grandfather, carrying forward the legacy of those who'd loved her before the darkness came. On the twins' naming ceremony, held in Umuora according to tradition, the compound overflowed with people from both worlds, villagers and business partners, orphans from the foundation, and dignitaries from the government, all gathered as one family to celebrate new life. Chief Okonkwo, impossibly old now but still sharp in mind and spirit, blessed the children with palm wine and prayers that echoed centuries of wisdom. These children are born of love that conquered hate, he declared in a voice that trembled but carried, born of dignity that survived humiliation, born of a woman who was sold but refused to be broken. May they carry this legacy forward through all their days. As the celebration continued with drums and dancing and abundant food, Adesi slipped away again to her mother's grave, this time carrying baby Chinwe in her arms. She knelt carefully, protecting her daughter from the earth while connecting her to it, and spoke to the grandmother who existed now only in memory and love. "Mama," she whispered, "this is your granddaughter, your namesake, born free and loved and wanted in ways I wasn't always sure I'd survive to experience. She has your eyes," Adesi continued. "Already I can see your kindness in the way she looks at the world, your strength in the way she grips my finger and refuses to let go. I'm going to tell her about you, she promised, about your songs and your wisdom and your love that sustained me through everything that came after you left. I'll teach her the Sankofa principle, Adaisi said, that we learn from the past but don't live in it, that every experience holds lessons if we're brave enough to find them. And I'll make sure she knows, she finished, that her grandmother was a woman of dignity and grace who loved her daughter enough to prepare her for a hard world without breaking her spirit. The baby cooed softly as if acknowledging her grandmother's presence, and Adiz felt again that warmth in the wind, that sense of connection transcending death and time and all the years between. When she returned to the celebration, Olamide was waiting with their son Ikenna in his arms, and together they stood as a family, complete, healed, whole. The elders presented them with a gift, a painting commissioned from the village's best artist, showing the baobab tree with two scenes. On one side, a girl being sold, on the other, a bride being celebrated, the same tree witnessing both tragedy and triumph. "This is your story," Chief Okonkwo said, presenting the painting. "But it's also our story, our shame and our redemption, our failure and our learning, our reminder that we must do better. Hang it where you'll see it daily," he instructed, "so you never forget where you came from, but also so you always remember how far you've traveled and how many you've brought with you on the journey." Years continued to pass like seasons, each one bringing new challenges and new victories, new girls rescued and new lives transformed through the Foundation's work. Adais became known across Nigeria not as the girl who was sold, but as the woman who saves, not as a victim, but as a force for change and justice. She spoke at conferences and universities, telling her story not for sympathy, but to inspire action, to challenge people to intervene when they see injustice, rather than looking away. And always, Olamide stood beside her, or slightly behind, supporting without overshadowing, providing resources without taking credit, loving without demanding recognition. Their partnership became a model for what marriage could be: mutual respect, shared purpose, individual strength, combining to create something greater than either could achieve alone. The village of Umuora transformed too, the school named after Chinwe, producing students who went to universities and returned with skills to build their community rather than escape it. The girls who might have been sold now became teachers and nurses and entrepreneurs. The boys who might have grown up thinking women were property now learned respect and equality. Chief Okonkwo's prediction proved true. Those children carried forward the legacy of Adaisi's triumph, creating a new generation that understood dignity and choice and the power of intervention. And what of Chidinma, Nkemji's daughter, who had once enjoyed privileges while Adaisi suffered? She came to work at the Foundation with genuine remorse and determination to make amends, starting as a volunteer and proving herself through dedication and hard work. Adaise watched her stepsister carefully at first, guarding against manipulation or hidden agendas, but gradually she saw real change, authentic growth, sincere desire to repair what her family had broken. Eventually, Chidinma became one of the Foundation's most valuable workers, driven by intimate knowledge of how families can fail children, how poverty and greed can corrupt love, how redemption requires consistent action, not just pretty words. She never asked for forgiveness explicitly, instead earning it through years of service, through late nights counseling traumatized girls, through patient work rebuilding what her mother had helped destroy. And one day, without planning or ceremony, Adiz called her sister, not stepsister, just sister, and the word carried healing for both of them, closing a wound that had festered for years. On Adaisi's 25th birthday, Olamide surprised her with a gift that made her weep. He'd found the compound where she grew up, bought it from the relatives who'd inherited it, and restored it completely. Not as a museum to suffering, but as a training center for the Foundation, a place where rescued girls could learn skills and build futures on the same ground where Adéis had once been beaten and broken. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The place of her greatest pain transformed into a source of hope for others. The compound that witnessed her abuse, now witnessing her triumph, multiplied through every girl who trained there. They stood together in the courtyard, the same space where Nkemji had counted blood money, where her father had died inside while still breathing, where every day had been survival rather than living. But now it held computers and sewing machines, books and hope, girls laughing and learning instead of suffering in silence. "This is perfect," Adéis whispered, holding Olamide close. "This is how we defeat the past, not by forgetting it, but by transforming it, not by running from it, but by redeeming it. Every girl who learns here," she continued, "every woman who builds a future on this ground is a testament that pain doesn't have to be the end of the story, that places of suffering can become sources of strength." And so the years flowed like the rivers of Nigeria, carrying Adéis and Olamide and their growing family forward through time, through challenges and celebrations, through the ordinary miracles of life, lived with purpose and love. They grew older together, silver threading through Olamide's hair, wisdom deepening in Adéis's eyes, their love maturing from the passionate intensity of youth to the profound comfort of partnership tested and proven. Their children grew strong and kind, Chinwe becoming a doctor who worked with trafficking victims, Ikenna becoming a lawyer who fought for children's rights, both of them carrying forward the legacy of intervention and justice. The Foundation expanded beyond Nigeria to other African nations, the model of rescue and restoration proving effective across borders and cultures, Adéis's story inspiring similar work throughout the continent. And through it all, the village of Umuora remained their touchstone, the place they returned to for festivals and ceremonies, for grounding and remembering, for connecting with the earth that held their ancestors and their history. Chief Okonkwo eventually passed, ancient and satisfied, having witnessed the redemption he'd helped facilitate, and at his funeral, Adéis spoke about forgiveness and second chances and communities that learn from their failures. The new generation of elders included women for the first time, a change Adéis had quietly advocated for, ensuring that future decisions about children would include those who understood motherhood and protection most intimately. On the 20th anniversary of the day, Olamide drove into Umuora and changed everything. They held a celebration under the baobab tree, now ancient beyond measure, its branches holding the weight of countless stories. Hundreds gathered, girls rescued over the years, now women with their own families, village elders and city officials, foundation workers and donors, a living testament to what intervention and love can accomplish. Adéis stood to speak, her voice strong and clear, carrying across the crowd with the authority of someone who'd earned every word through experience and perseverance. 20 years ago, she began, "I stood in this very spot being sold like property, and I thought my life was over, thought the darkness had won, thought I was exactly what they called me, cursed and worthless. But a stranger in a black SUV proved that one person's intervention can change everything," she continued, "that wealth used for compassion is more powerful than money hoarded for greed, that love based on respect can heal wounds that hatred inflicted. I learned that our worst moments don't define us," Adéis declared. "They refine us. They teach us. They prepare us for the purpose we were always meant to serve but needed breaking to discover. Every girl we've rescued, every life we've changed, every future we've restored, she said, is a testament not to my strength, but to the strength in all of us when we choose courage over comfort, action over apathy, love over indifference. She looked at Olamide, standing with their now-grown children, and her heart swelled with gratitude for the journey they'd walked together. "This man," she said, pointing to him, "saw me at my lowest and chose to lift me up. Not because he wanted something from me, but because he couldn't live with himself if he walked away. He taught me that real love is patient and respectful, that it empowers rather than controls, that it builds up rather than tears down." She continued, "And together, we've tried to multiply that love through every life we touch. But I also learned," Adais said, turning back to the crowd, "that I had to save myself too, that rescue is just the beginning, that real healing requires choosing every day to move forward, to forgive without forgetting, to transform pain into purpose." The crowd was silent, hanging on every word, and she felt the weight of her responsibility to speak truth that might guide others through their own darkness. So to anyone listening who feels sold, abandoned, cursed, worthless, she said, her voice rising with passion, "I tell you this, your current circumstance is not your final destination. Your pain is not your identity. Your past is not your prison. You have more strength than you know, more potential than anyone has acknowledged, more destiny than your situation suggests," Adesi declared, "and sometimes you just need one person to believe in you until you can believe in yourself." "Be that person for someone else," she urged. "Intervene when you see injustice. Speak up when you witness abuse. Extend a hand when someone is drowning. Because you might be the stranger in the black SUV that changes someone's entire trajectory." The crowd erupted in applause and ululations, the sound rolling across the village like thunder, like drums, like the voice of the ancestors themselves celebrating this testimony of triumph. As the celebration continued into the night with food and music and dancing, Adais and Olamide found a quiet moment alone, walking to the edge of the village where the land opened up to fields and sky. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked him. "Regret that day you drove into this village and complicated your entire life by rescuing a girl you didn't know?" "Never," Olamide answered without hesitation. "That was the day my life gained meaning beyond profit margins and construction projects, the day I found my purpose and my partner and my path forward. You saved me as much as I saved you," he continued. "You reminded me why wealth matters, not for accumulation, but for impact, not for status, but for service, not for personal comfort, but for communal elevation." They stood in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the celebration in the distance, two souls who had found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful from broken pieces. And far away in that distant city, Nkemji lay on a mat in her small room, old beyond her years, sick from poverty and regret and the accumulated weight of choices that couldn't be undone. She had nothing now, no money, no family, no friends, no comfort in her final days, except the small mercy of memory that sometimes allowed her to forget. But sometimes, in lucid moments, she would remember the girl she'd sold, would see a Daisy's face in her mind, would feel the crushing weight of what she'd done to an innocent child. She'd heard stories through the years, whispers about a Daisy's success and marriage and foundation, about how the cursed girl had become blessed beyond measure. And in those moments, Nkemji understood finally what she'd thrown away, understood that the real wealth had been in her hands all along in the form of a stepdaughter who could have loved her if given the chance. But understanding came too late, as it often does for those who choose greed over love, who prioritize immediate gain over lasting relationship, who see people as transactions rather than treasures. She died alone one rainy night, her passing unmarked and unmourned, her name becoming a cautionary tale whispered to children about the consequences of cruelty and greed. Karma had completed its work, justice had been served, and the universe had demonstrated once again its perfect balance. What you give returns to, you multiplied. But this story doesn't end with Nkemji's death, or even with Adaizi's triumph, because the real ending is still being written in every girl the Foundation rescues, every life transformed, every choice made for good instead of evil. The real ending is in Chinwe the Younger, Adaizi's daughter, now a doctor who treats trafficking victims with the kind of compassion her mother showed her. It's in Ekena, the Younger, Adaizi's son, a lawyer who fights for children's rights with the fierce dedication his father demonstrated. It's in the hundreds of women who were rescued and now rescue others, who were educated and now educate others, who were loved and now love others, creating an ever-expanding circle of redemption. The real ending is in Umuara itself, transformed from a village that sold its daughter to a community that celebrates intervention, from a place of shame to a place of learning, from complicit bystanders to active participants in justice. And perhaps most powerfully, the real ending is in you, the person hearing this story right now, the one who might be suffering, or might be in a position to help someone who's suffering. Because every story is an invitation to examine our own lives, to ask ourselves hard questions about what we've witnessed and done nothing about, what we could change if we found the courage. So let me bring this story to its close by returning to where we began. That dusty village square, that moment of transaction, that point where one man's intervention changed everything. If Olamide had driven past that day, if he'd decided it wasn't his business, if he'd chosen comfort over courage, none of this would exist. Not the Foundation, not the rescued girls, not the transformed village, not the love that grew between two broken souls. One choice, one moment, one act of intervention created ripples that are still spreading, still touching lives, still changing destinies. And that's the power we all possess, the potential we all carry, the responsibility we all share, to be the intervention someone desperately needs, to be the voice that speaks up when others stay silent, to be the hand that reaches out when everyone else turns away. Adaiz was sold by her stepmother to pay a debt she didn't owe, reduced to a price tag in a village square, treated as property rather than a person with infinite worth and potential. But the billionaire who saved her didn't just fall in love with her. He fell in love with the possibility of who she could become when given safety and education and respect. He fell in love with her strength and resilience and refusal to be broken by her circumstances. And in falling in love, he rose. She rose. They rose together, lifting everyone around them through the power of love that transcends transaction, that values people over profit, that chooses compassion over convenience. This is not just their story. This is humanity's story, the eternal cycle of suffering and intervention, of breaking and healing, of selling and redemption that plays out in different forms across every culture and generation. It's the story of every person who's been undervalued discovering their worth, every victim becoming a victor, every sold soul finding freedom. It's the story of every person with power choosing to use it for good, every wealthy individual remembering that money is a tool for transformation, not just accumulation, every successful person reaching back to pull others up. And it's the story of every community that fails someone, faces that failure, and chooses to do better, to change, to become the village that protects rather than sells its children. So as we close this tale, carry these truths with you into whatever comes next. In your own journey through this complicated, beautiful, painful, hopeful world we share. Remember that your value is not determined by those who couldn't see it. Your worth is not diminished by those who tried to sell it. Your destiny is not canceled by those who bet against it. Remember that one person's intervention can change everything. That your action or inaction has consequences you may never fully comprehend. That the choice to help someone might be the hinge upon which multiple destinies turn. Remember that love built on respect and shared purpose will outlast love built on passion alone. That true partnership empowers both people to become more than they could be separately. That the strongest unions are forged through fire, not formed in comfort. Remember that communities can change, that people can grow, that redemption is always possible for those willing to acknowledge their failures and do the hard work of becoming better. Remember that the places of your deepest pain can become your greatest platform for purpose, that what you've survived can become what you use to help others survive, that your scars are maps for those still lost in similar darkness. And finally, remember that you were never for sale, never worthless, never cursed, always valuable, always destined for light, always carrying more strength and potential than your circumstances suggest. Just like a daze, you might be in your darkest hour right now. The stepmother might be scheming. The village might be whispering. The merchant might be counting his money. The future might look impossible from where you stand, trembling and afraid. But hold on with everything you have, because somewhere your intervention is coming. Your rescue is approaching. Your transformation is beginning even if you can't see it yet. It might not come in a black SUV, might not come with billions in the bank, might not look anything like you expected, but your liberation is coming in whatever form it needs to take. And when it comes, receive it with grace. Let it transform you. Use it to discover your purpose, then turn around and become that liberation for someone else. This is how we change the world, one rescued soul at a time, one act of courage at a time, one choice for love over hate, building over destroying, forgiving over revenge at a time. Adeze was sold by her stepmother to pay a debt, but the billionaire who saved her fell deeply in love with her, and in that love they both found salvation, purpose, and the power to transform not just their own lives, but hundreds of others. This is not just a story about rescue, it's a story about resurrection, of dignity, of hope, of humanity itself, proving once again that love is more powerful than greed, that intervention matters more than indifference, that one life valued properly creates value for countless others. So go now, carrying this tale in your heart, like a daisy carried her mother's necklace, as a reminder of where you came from, as a symbol of what you've survived, as a promise of where you're going and who you're becoming through every choice you make from this moment forward. Share this story with someone who needs hope, with someone who's forgotten their worth, with someone standing in their own village square waiting for intervention, because your sharing might be the reminder that saves them. And remember always that the girl who was sold for 200,000 naira became priceless beyond measure, not because of money or status or marriage to a billionaire, but because she remembered who she was beneath all the pain, a daughter of Chinwe, a carrier of the Sankofa wisdom, a child of destiny destined for light just like you. In the heart of every pain lies the seed of your purpose. Water it with tears if you must, but never let it die, because one day that seed will grow into a tree so strong and beautiful that people will gather in its shade and forget it ever started, as something small and buried in darkness. You are that seed. You are that tree. You are the shade for others still struggling in the heat of their own suffering. And your story matters. Your voice matters. Your choice to rise matters more than you may ever fully know. This is the truth that Adaeze discovered and now lives daily, the truth that transformed Olamide from wealthy to truly rich, the truth that changed Umuora from complicit to conscious, the truth that can change you if you let it. You were never meant to be sold. You were always meant to be celebrated. You were never cursed. You were always blessed. You were never worthless. You were always priceless. You were never alone. You were always accompanied by ancestors and destiny, and a future calling you forward into light. So live like Adaeze. Take the pain and transform it. Take the rejection and let it refine you. Take the selling and use it to understand the value of every human soul you encounter. Love like Olamide. See beyond surfaces to potential. Use your resources for restoration. Intervene when you witness injustice, even when it's inconvenient or costly or complicated. Change like Umuora. Admit when you're wrong. Learn from your failures. Become better than you were. Create space for those you've harmed to heal and thrive. And always, always remember that this story, Adaeze's story, Olamide's story, your story, is still being written with every choice, every action, every moment of courage or cowardice, every decision to help or to walk away, every time you choose love over hate, hope over despair, action over apathy. The ending isn't written yet. The final chapter remains open. The pen is in your hand. And what you write next matters more than anything that's been written before. So write well, live fully, love deeply, intervene courageously, and never forget that you, like Adaeze, are destined for light no matter how dark the current night may seem. Ace. Amen. So shall it be. And so it already is for those with eyes to see, and hearts brave enough to believe in redemption, in transformation, in the power of one intervention to change everything, forever and always, without end.